Hello everybody, my name is Rachel and welcome to my channel Kalanati. Today I'm doing part 2 of my November reading wrap-up. I have got like 17 different things to mention. I was on vacation for a whole week and I read a lot of short things. So let's get into it. So let's begin with the 3 books I'm going to talk about in a separate video. I read a lot of short stories in November, so I decided to put the collections and anthologies in their own video. So the first one will be The Fox's Tower and Other Tales by Yoon Lee. This is a collection of flash fiction that I really enjoyed. Lee is just so good at short fiction. There will also be 2 anthologies in that wrap-up. One is Mother of Invention, edited by Rivqa Rafael and Tansy Rayner Roberts. I buddy read this with Shannon from That's So Po, and it was an interesting read, though not my favorite anthology. There were still some good stories from that one. And then a really fun queer adventure anthology called Silk and Steel, edited by Janine A. Southward. This was the November pick for the Shorts and Sorcery Book Club, run by Rhea from the Bookfinch, and this was just a really fun, sweet read. A lot of very fluffy, cute, romantic adventure stories. I super enjoyed it. So more on those soon, if not already, because I don't remember my video schedule. Alright, let's get into all the other things that I read in November. First up, I finished the Jacob's Ladder series by Elizabeth Bear. That one begins with Dust, which I talked about in one of my October wrap-ups, and then I read the second and third books, which are called Chill and Grail. This series is about a generation ship established by a very weird, like, religious fundamental group. And they may or may not have a destination. The ship actually gets kind of stranded around a star that's about to go nova for like 500 years. The first book is about how they're trying to get the ship moving again and trying to establish a new captain to be in control of the ship and the AI systems. And then the second and third books are about kind of the after effects of, I don't know, kind of like this coup in the first book. And then going to their actual destination, a place called Grail, and what they might find there. I think this is a very interesting story in the way that it talks about like accelerated evolution and genetic tinkering. All of the characters are very, very far away from baseline human, and it's really interesting that after the first 2 books, when they finally encounter another human species in the third book, to be able to look back on them and to realize that these people that, like, I came to think of them as being very normal were really not. But having that outside perspective was really interesting. There's also a lot in this about like gender and sexuality, especially in the first book, which is something I didn't really talk about when I discussed Dust. So overall, it was really interesting. I became much more invested in the story as the series progressed, and I really enjoyed the final book and how complex things became. I'm not sure that I loved the way that it ended. I felt like the ending kind of came out of nowhere, even though it's obviously connected to what's happened before, but it wasn't really what I had expected the conclusion, the final decisions to be. But it was really interesting, and I feel like this may have been kind of a precursor to Elizabeth Bear's white space novels. She's definitely using some concepts like right-minding and discussing the ethics and the problems, but also benefits of that for societies. And I feel like ideas like that, similar to that, were very heavily used in her white space novels. So these were good. Not my favorite things by her, but if you're interested in Elizabeth Bear's science fiction, maybe versus her perhaps better known fantasy novels, I think these are quite worth reading, especially if you are not put off by the initially very like feudal system, Arthurian legend references throughout. Next up, I read 3 novellas by Caitlin R. Kiernan, which I have very mixed feelings on. This is the Tinfoil Dossier series, which are 3 novellas put out by Tor.com. They are Agents of Dreamland, Black Helicopters, and The Tindalos Asset. Agents of Dreamland came out in 2017, and I read it back then, and I liked it, even if I didn't feel like I completely understood it. So I reread it, and then went on to finish the other 2. Agents of Dreamland is my favorite. The other 2 were just sometimes incomprehensible. So all of these are basically about agents of a mysterious organization that is investigating and covering up supernatural, paranormal, alien events. The first one is about like this invasion of alien fungal spores that might spell an apocalypse for the human race. The second one, I have no idea. I did not like this one and I could not figure out what it was about. My best guess is that something comes out of the ocean and disappears an island off the coast of Maine or something, but I've no clue what the story was trying to say. And then the third one, the Tindalos asset, is about this very disturbing ancient figurine that might be used to call, like, I don't know, a Cthulhu monster out of the depths of the ocean and destroy the world. So yeah, Agents of Dreamland was my favorite one, even though it jumps around in time and with different perspectives. I felt like I understood what the story was and how everything connected, and since I was rereading it, I kind of remembered how things went and I got more of the references, so I enjoyed this one. Like, I would actually recommend this to other people who are interested in super weird kind of Lovecraftian horror stuff. It was good. Black Helicopters, as I think I have expressed already, I thought was a chaotic jumble of stream of consciousness, paranoid delusions, and drug use. Like, I think that one of the points of the story is that a woman is kind of split in two in a horrific scientific experimentation and then brought back together again. And it might kind of be an interesting idea of how you take one person and turn it into two and then merge them back again, except that it's literally fueled with like cocaine and heroin and horrific psychological torture, so no. And then the Tindalos asset I found a bit more comprehensible, but this is the point, like halfway through this novella, when I realized that there was so much like grotesque and horrific substance abuse in these stories. It was really disturbing to me. Also, like, to give you an idea of how disturbing some of the events in the series are, this features a woman who is sewn into the corpse of a whale, and she's still alive. Yeah. We'll just leave it at that. Moving on to things that I enjoyed more, I read another little novella, The Impossible Resurrection of Grief by Octavia Cade. I've been saving this for the right moment. It's one of my anticipated reads of the year, and it was interesting. So this is all about the grief. This like debilitating grief, obsessive depression that strikes a lot of scientists when like animals go extinct or nature is destroyed. It's this like giving up and mourning the world that we can never get back, that humans have destroyed, and the grief always apparently ends in suicide. The story is told from a woman who studies jellyfish. Her like best friend is, you know, succumbs to the grief, and then weird things start happening where this woman keeps being invited to places where she encounters like kind of like mad scientists who are trying to revive extinct species in various ways, and they are trying to ensnare her in this. And there's kind of this discussion of like what personality might be susceptible to the grief and who might be more resilient in the face of that. What is it about this main character where everybody's interested in her and whether she would ever, you know, feel the grief? I'm not entirely sure I have all of my thoughts straight on this one, but I thought it was a really interesting read. It was mysterious and strange and a little bit disturbing, and definitely made me think about the loss of the natural world and extinction, but also like de-extinction and why you might want to do that, whether it's a good idea or not. Yeah, it was really interesting. And aside from the actual content of the story, I love the cover of this. It does feature a thylacine and the birds, I don't remember what they're called, that are also in the story, and it's It's a really striking cover in my opinion. Untamed Shore by Silvia Moreno-Garcia. I decided to go ahead and read this really quickly after not super loving Velvet Was the Night, which was a very noir crime fiction thriller. And Untamed Shore is also a thriller, but I enjoyed it a lot more. It had fewer like really conflicting characters for me and not as much thuggish violence, though it does involve murder. So this is set in 1970s Mexico in a little tourist town, and it is from the perspective of Viridiana, a teenager who works as like a tourist guide during the summers. She speaks multiple languages, including English fluently, and the man who has taught her languages and is a friend of her father's gets her a job one summer as an assistant to an American man. This really wealthy dude has come to Mexico. He's decided to hang out and write a book, and he wants an assistant. He brings his like trophy wife and her brother, and Viridiana basically moves into their household and things get weird. Somebody dies, everything starts to fall apart, and she decides to be loyal to and to trust these two people who are probably not who they say they are. It is, I guess, a coming of age story. Like the Viridiana at the beginning of this summer is not the same person as the Viridiana at the end of the summer. And what I ended up liking about her, even though I felt like she made some kind of stupid decisions in the beginning of the story, I felt like they were realistic decisions. She gets herself into trouble, and then she has the wherewithal to find a solution to get herself out of the problem. Was it ethical? Maybe not, but I think that what I ultimately found appealing about her and her story is that she is a very bright, talented, independent teenager who could use more opportunity and is rebelling in the way that young people often are, who is maybe a bit overconfident, that a very realistic thing, and learns the hard way that she maybe doesn't judge people correctly, or that she doesn't really know what's going on outside of this bubble that she's grown up in. And yeah, I found it to be a really interesting story. I was pretty much glued to the page, and yeah, super enjoyed this one. It's still not like my favorite genre, but it was really readable. Next up is something new for me to experience. That is The Rose by Tiffany Rice. I'm pretty sure this is the first work of erotica I've ever read. I've really been enjoying reading romance over the last couple of years, and I think when I picked this up, I didn't quite realize that it was essentially erotic fiction. I should have known, given how much Kazan from Always Doing has been talking about it, but apparently I just sort of glossed over that little bit. Anyway, I read this because Kazan has spoken so highly of it, and it was good, it was interesting, it was erotic, and I'm a little bit torn on how I feel about it. Like, I think perhaps the fact that it is erotica made me a little bit uncomfortable. At the same time that I was reading it, I was like, this is really well done. So basically it is about a young woman who gets like this ancient Greek cup given to her at her birthday. It turns out it has special powers where if you drink from it with somebody else, your erotic fantasies will come to life. She doesn't really believe this, but a man shows up who wants to take the cup. He's like, this is a very special cup and I need to take it and protect it or whatever. And he's like trying to convince her that it's really like magical, and she doesn't really believe him. So he convinces her to drink from the cup with him and fulfills her sexual fantasies. So it's actually like a series of like erotic retellings of famous stories like Achilles and Briseis and Psyche and Cupid and stuff, but genuinely fantasies and less problematic in some cases. What I think was really well done about this is the story that holds it all together. Outside of the sexual fantasies, there is a story happening, and the relationship as people get to know each other more and the problems they're trying to fix and everything. It was really interesting. I don't know if I would read more from this series. I think there are 2 other books kind of related to it. But this one, it was interesting to at least try something like this once. Let's switch gears and talk about nonfiction for a second. I listened to The Last Stargazers by Emily Levesque, and I really enjoyed this. I picked this up because in general, I like books about physics and cosmology and stuff, and I didn't look too closely at this when I picked it up. I thought, oh, it's just gonna be like a modern astronomy physics book. What this is basically an explanation of what it means to be a modern day astronomer. What is like life like for an astronomer? It's an interesting question. It's basically Levesque takes the idea, the stereotype that a lot of people have of an astronomer and dissects it and explains, no, that's not really how it is, but actually sometimes it is. It's really interesting. There's a lot about the stories people tell about hanging out on mountaintops at observatories in complete isolation and the weird things that happen there, but also like, why do people choose to do this? Like, what draws people to be an astronomer? I think my only criticism of this book is that while Levesque does talk somewhat about the issues of sexism and racism in astronomy, in the physics and cosmology fields, she doesn't talk about it nearly as much as I thought she could have. Obviously she is a woman and she's had her own experiences, and she mentions that and a couple of other women's, but I feel like most of this was kind of talking about history and like, oh yeah, 30 years ago women were banned from living at some observatories and it's been difficult for some Black people. There aren't a lot of Black astronomers out there, but she didn't talk very much about like, what are you doing about it today? You know, what are some initiatives? What are the opinions of astronomers today on this? So I thought that could have been expanded quite a bit. Possibly it doesn't quite fit within the scope of the book in the sense that it's supposed to be more entertaining. But I did notice that, like, I feel like the issues of sexism and racism in the sciences is so often relegated to just a couple of paragraphs or a small chapter at the end of a lot of physics books, and I would like for it to not be tacked on at the end. I would like start the book with that if you need to. Let's talk about it more. But I wouldn't say this is a severe criticism of the book. I still very much enjoyed it. Next up is How Do You Live by Genzaburo Yoshino. This is translated into English by Bruno Navasky, and it is a Japanese children's classic from 1937. I think it was also like edited and revised and published again, so maybe it was updated at some point. But this is the first time it's been available in English, and it is going to be adapted into a Miyazaki film, and I can see why. It's like perfect subject matter for Miyazaki. So basically, this is about a teenage boy nicknamed Copper conversing with his uncle about his problems and growing up, and his uncle giving him advice on how to live well, how to be a good person with the goal of growing up to be a great man. It's a lot of life lessons and a lot of advice, and I found it to be way more interesting than I think that I'm making it sound. But I don't know. I think the most interesting thing to me about this book is that all of the advice and the experiences that this teenage boy has with his friends and at school, with his family, the problems he gets into, the advice he gets to get out of it, it is so relatable. This is from the 1930s in a completely different culture from my own, and it sounds so familiar. Like, this is a universal experience about growing up and deciding what kind of person you're going to be, and there are just some universals about how to be a good person and how to relate to other people and to how to control your own actions, basically. So I really enjoyed this, and I super hope that that Miyazaki adaptation comes out at some point because I would like to see it. And lastly, I have 4 quick things that I want to talk about. One is volume 8 of Witch Hat Atelier by Kamome Shirahama. I continue to really enjoy the series, and I think it's become a lot more rewarding and complicated since the first 2 or 3 volumes. I initially thought the series was going to be very sweet, almost like saccharine, and not very original, but it's become a lot more over 8 volumes. This one brings back the character on the cover, Tarta, who is a peer of Coco's and all the little girls in the story. And I feel like this had some interesting development for Coco as a character. She's been presented as a very naive, innocent, good girl. And here she's confronted with some of her friends, like trusted people in her life, who have decided to maybe break some of the sacrosanct rules that she's been taught. And how will that change her actions, her worldview? I think that's going to be very interesting. And we're slowly getting into darker and darker territory with the story, which I think also makes it more interesting. Then there is this beautiful children's picture book called Hicotea by Lorena Alvarez. This is actually the second in the Nightlight series. I think there are just 2 of them out, but I got this one. I requested it from the library and they don't have the first one. This was adorable, but it also has some of the most gorgeous artwork I've ever seen in a picture book. I mean, oh, it's so good. So this is about a little girl who goes with her school group on a trip to the local wetlands, and she finds this like tortoise shell and goes into it in this like magical adventure where something is threatening the wetlands and she has to help the tortoise and the other things there. And just look at this artwork, guys. Like, it was a good story. It was a really good story, but the artwork is amazing. Like, pretty much every page I was like, oh my god, can I get an art print of this? It's just stunning. I might end up having to get a copy of this for myself. And lastly, I read 2 children's picture books in Spanish for continuing my language practice. The first one was Los Siete Cabritos by Tareixa Alonso. This is basically a retelling of the traditional Wolf and the 7 Goats story, which I was not familiar with, though it gave me like real 3 Little Pigs vibes, but it's its own story. This was fine. I don't have much to say about it, but I did understand it in Spanish. And then I read a bilingual picture book, which was Me llamo Gabriel, La vida de Gabriel Garcia Marquez by Monica Brown. So this is in Spanish and in English, and as usual, I read the Spanish first and then the English once I wanted to check that I understood it. I think this is the 3rd or 4th in this series that I've read. There are these children's biographies of famous people from like Central America and South America. So I liked this one, and obviously I already knew a little bit about Gabriel Garcia Marquez, so it wasn't anything new to me. But yeah, I liked it and I understood it. So that is it for the second part of my November wrap up. If you stuck with me through all these weird jumbled together things, thank you. Let me know if you have also read any of these books, or if you want to, leave me a comment down below. I always appreciate it. And I'll be back to talk to you again about more books very soon. And until then, bye.